Welcome to Whispered Clues. Tonight, Sherlock Holmes faces a chilling enigma, a man found smiling at his own grave. If your curiosity's awake, subscribe and let the mystery begin. It began with the faint tap of a cane against wet flagstones, a slow, deliberate rhythm that drifted up from Baker Street below our window. Holmes had been motionless for nearly an hour, his gaze fixed upon the dying glow of the fire, when that tapping cut through the quiet like a coded summons. He lifted one finger, and I, who had learned the meaning of his smallest gestures, rose to admit our visitor. The street lamp beyond the fogged glass wavered, and in its uncertain light appeared a figure both precise and spectral, a tall, elderly man in a morning coat, his gloves damp, his hat brim glittering with drizzle. He carried the cane whose sound had heralded him, and its silver handle shone like a muted star. "Dr. Watson?" he asked quietly. "Yes, pray come in." He crossed the threshold with a measured grace, but even before he spoke again, I sensed that his composure was armor. Holmes had not stirred, save for the turn of his head. "You may address Mr. Sherlock Holmes," I said. "You have found him, sir?" The stranger inclined his head. "My name is Latham, Edwin Latham of St. Marylebone. I was told you might accept a matter of personal perplexity." Holmes rose at last, tall and lean, the movement unhurried. "A matter of perplexity, Mr. Latham," he said. "The world thrives on them. Sit by the fire, your coat steams." The cane tapped once more, upon the floorboards as Latham obeyed. That was the moment I noticed his left hand tremble slightly the same rhythm as before, a quiet tap, 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 out first recurrence of the sound that would, before long, bind the whole affair. "I come," he said, from the grave of a man who smiles. "And I have no peace." Holmes regarded him keenly. "You mean that figuratively, I presume?" "I wish I did." Latham's eyes, grey and exhausted, turned towards the hearth. 3 weeks ago my father, the late Arthur Latham, was laid to rest in the family plot at St. Olave's. Yesterday morning I went to place fresh flowers. The caretaker stood beside me when we saw it. "It, sir?" I prompted. The coffin lid had shifted, cracked from within. And his face, gentlemen, his face had changed. The undertaker swears he sealed him, yet there he lay with lips drawn upward as though smiling. Holmes folded his hands behind him. "Graves do not open themselves," he said, "nor do expressions alter without cause." What followed? I ordered the tomb resealed at once, but by evening the tale had spread. Some local wag declared my father had been seen standing beside the church gate that night. It has made me the subject of pity and ridicule. Yet I know what I saw. The rhythmic cane tapped once more. I found the sound disquieting now, like a pulse under conversation. Holmes moved closer, his tone light. "Your father's business, Mr. Latham, what was it?" "Insurance, sir." He retired. 2 years ago, a careful man. There was a small scandal in the firm, nothing proven. A partner vanished with funds, leaving my father to shoulder the ruin. He suffered a stroke last February and never recovered. Holmes nodded slowly. "And you believe this manifestation has some human agency behind it?" "I fear so, or worse, that I am losing my reason." Holmes's eyes glimmered. Reason rarely deserts those who suspect it has. The fire popped, echoing faintly, a counterpoint to that infernal tapping. Holmes bent to examine the cane, holding it to the light. "Curious workmanship," he murmured. "German silver head, recent polish, faint scuffing at the ferrule. You have walked tonight through soft ground." Latham blinked. "The churchyard path is damp." "Indeed, yet there is chalk beneath the ferrule, a rarity in that part of London. Have you been elsewhere?" A pause. I stopped briefly in Fenchurch Street. Holmes replaced the cane. "On business?" "No," said Latham after a moment. "On habit?" My father's office still bears our name. I go there when I wish to feel less alone. The silence that followed was heavy enough to press the air itself. Holmes's gaze softened. You have come not for exorcism, but for explanation. Very well. Dr. Watson and I shall accompany you to St. Olave's in the morning. Until then, I suggest you sleep, if you can. Latham rose, uncertain, and bowed slightly. You think I'm mad, Mr. Holmes? I think, Holmes replied, that graves are poor jesters. They rarely smile without instruction. The man drew a shaky breath, turned, and left. The tap of his cane receded down the stairs, slower now, uneven, fading into the wind. Holmes did not move until the final echo had vanished. Then he turned toward me. Watson, note the tremor in the left hand, the precise rhythm of his cane. The man rehearses grief as if timed to a metronome. Something compels him beyond sorrow. You suspect him? On the contrary, I suspect whoever taught him to keep time. He crossed to the window and opened it a fraction. The fog pressed in like breath, carrying a faint chiming from St. Olave's tower. Holmes listened, eyes half closed. Do you hear it, Watson? The bell? The interval between bells. He smiled thinly. That, my dear fellow, is where the truth hides. The fog swirled, the fire hissed, and somewhere beyond the window the faintest tap echoed once more, steady, deliberate, as though waiting for our reply. Holmes did not sleep that night, though I confess that I tried. The faint tapping I had thought to be a memory persisted, as though the sound itself had followed Latham from the street into our very walls. When I came down at dawn, the sitting-room curtain was already drawn back, the fire rebuilt, and Holmes bent over a square of linen spread across the table. Upon it lay the silver-headed cane, dismantled like a small engine of deceit. He greeted me without looking up. Good morning, Watson. Observe what remorse conceals. The cane? I asked, rubbing my eyes. Precisely. Our client's grief has been carrying an instrument more articulate than its owner. He tapped the hollow shaft lightly. Listen. A metallic rattle answered the faintest tinkle of dust and grit. He shook it once more. A folded scrap slid from within. I leaned forward. A note? Holmes unfolded the damp paper carefully. The ink had bled, but 2 words were still legible. Ring twice. Instructions, Holmes murmured. But to whom? The dead or the living? I stared at him. You believe this connects to his father's grave? I believe, said Holmes, rising, that when a man visits a tomb and hears no reply, he sometimes invents one. We shall see who answered Mr. Latham. The tapping motif continued faintly outside the milkman's cart, the horse's hooves, the soft patter of a wet morning. Holmes paused to listen to the rhythm, as though aligning thought to cadence. Fetch your coat, Watson. We go to St. Olave's while the city still yawns. We found the churchyard hemmed by black railings and ghostly birch trees dripping rain. The caretaker, a stooped man in a frayed greatcoat, looked up from polishing the gate latch as we approached. Morning, sir, he said, squinting at Holmes. You'll be Mr. Latham's people. Merely observers, Holmes replied. You witnessed the disturbance? That I did. A fine coffin split clean through, never seen the like. The man shuddered. I heard a sound that night before the family came, a sort of scraping under the stone. Thought it rats. Yet you did not look. Holmes's tone was mild. Would you, sir, with them stories about the dead that walk? Holmes smiled faintly. I would look, mister. Higby, Thomas Higby, caretaker, 23 years. Then Mr. Higby, Holmes said, you will oblige me by opening the vault once more. The man hesitated. It ain't proper, sir. The son said it was to stay shut. Holmes produced a small card from his pocket. I act in Mr. Latham's interest. You have my assurance. After some muttering, Higby fetched a ring of keys. The iron hinges groaned as the gate opened. We followed him through rows of stones, slick with moss, until we reached a marble slab freshly sealed with cement. A narrow crack, hastily patched, ran across the lid like a healed wound. Holmes crouched, brushing the seam with his fingertip. "Poor workmanship," he murmured. "Note the difference in texture. Watson fresh, cement upon older dust. Someone reopened this after the mason's men left. You think it's deliberate?" "Indubitably." He straightened. "Mr. Higby, when was the ground last disturbed before the funeral?" "Not for 5 years, sir. Old Lady Latham, God rest her." Holmes nodded, producing a small magnifier. He studied the base of the slab, then the grass surrounding it. "2 sets of prints," he said. "One broad-soled, the other narrow with a pronounced heel female. Likely." "Recently." "A woman?" I said. "Or a man with dainty affectations," Holmes replied, dryly. "Watson, what do you make of this?" He pointed to a length of fine thread caught beneath a chip of marble. "Silk black torn. Excellent. Funeral attire. Someone wished to hide their presence here under the guise of mourning." The church bell tolled once above us. Between that note and the next, Holmes tilted his head, listening again to that silence he so prized. "There it is," he whispered. "The interval. Tell me, Higby, does anyone ring the bell twice a morning?" "Only for a burial, sir. 1 for death, 2 for interment." "Indeed," said Holmes softly. "Then our note's command ring twice was not addressed to the belfry, but to the grave itself." Someone wished for a signal. At that moment a figure appeared beyond the railing, Mr. Latham himself, pale and dishevelled. He had evidently been watching. "I could not remain at home," he said hoarsely. "You've come early." Holmes eyed him without surprise. "And so have you, Mr. Latham. May I ask who accompanies you to such vigils?" "No one," he answered quickly. Holmes bent again to the stone. "Then who left footprints smaller than your own?" Latham's jaw tightened. "I cannot say." Holmes's voice gentled. "You can, but will not." The man's cane slipped from his hand, and the head struck the marble with a sharp tap. The sound seemed to echo beneath the earth. "Enough," he whispered. "I thought I heard him once from my father. I came at night, yes, but I swear I am not mad." "Madness is a luxury few afford," said Holmes. "Your confession merely confirms that someone exploited your grief. Did you receive letters?" Latham's eyes flicked up sharply. "How did you know? The tremor in your left hand fear of something tangible, not imagined." "Where are they?" He reached into his coat and withdrew 2 envelopes damp from the rain. Holmes opened the first. The same delicate hand had written, "Return at dawn, bring flowers, ring twice." Holmes smiled faintly. The orchestration continues. "Someone has been conducting you like a metronome, Mr. Latham." "But to what end?" I asked. "To ensure that the grave was opened under witness," Holmes replied. "What better way to conceal theft or substitution than beneath the veil of horror? While you trembled before a smiling corpse, something else was removed." "Removed?" cried Latham. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Your father's signet, perhaps? Or papers of value placed with him?" Latham gasped. The firm's ledgers were sealed in a tin box within the coffin. "I wished them buried with him for shame." "And shame," said Holmes, "is easily unearthed." He turned abruptly toward the church tower. The bell sounded again, deep and resonant. Between those 2 notes hung a faint metallic tap, distant, yet deliberate, as though some unseen hand struck metal against stone in perfect time. Holmes's eyes flashed. "Watson, did you hear it?" "Yes," I said quietly. "From within the vault." He straightened, his expression unreadable. Then our smiling gentleman may not rest as peacefully as we assumed. The fog thickened around the stones. Somewhere below, the echo of that tap repeated, precise and patient, as if waiting for us to answer. Holmes had already knelt beside the slab, ear pressed against the cold marble. I watched his lean figure go utterly still, save for the faint rise of breath. The fog muffled every sound but that faint metallic pulse, a patient rhythm from below, like a fingernail upon a coffin lid. Holmes raised one hand sharply. "Silence, Watson, count the beats." I strained to hear. Tap, tap, tap. Then a pause. Then twice in quick succession. 5. Then 2, I whispered. Exactly. Holmes stood, his expression grim. A code, deliberate. If there were air pockets beneath, we might dismiss it as echo, but the pattern is too regular. "Higby!" The caretaker, trembling beside the rail, shook his head. "It ain't possible, sir. No one down there but the old man, God help us." Holmes turned on him. "Fetch a crowbar. Now!" Latham's face had gone ashen. "You mean to open it?" "I mean to answer," said Holmes. "If there is movement beneath, then there is life or cunning." Higby hesitated only a moment before scuttling off toward his shed. The moment the man's footsteps faded, Holmes's voice dropped. "Watson, note the cadence. It corresponds to the words, 'ring twice.' Someone below is communicating with the surface, but the coffin was resealed, precisely, which means our smiling gentleman has a messenger alive." Latham stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot mean someone inside?" Holmes regarded the marble surface coldly. "If your father rests there, he rests not alone." Higby returned with the crowbar, his hands shaking so violently the metal clanged against the slab sound that echoed back with uncanny symmetry. Holmes nodded once. "Pry the edge gently. Watson, assist him." Between us we worked at the seal until the cement split with a dull crack. A smell of damp stone and decay rose as the lid shifted half an inch. Holmes's lantern beam cut into the darkness below, glinting on brass handles and the pale shimmer of cloth. "Hold," he murmured. "Do not lift further." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small mirror, lowering it toward the gap. For a few seconds it reflected nothing but a flicker of light from within, faint but undeniable. Holmes drew it back and showed it to me. "See!" The reflection trembles. Someone moves beneath. Latham cried out, but Holmes's hand shot up. "Control yourself, sir. If this is trickery, we must catch it in the act." He crouched again, listening. The tapping had ceased. The silence was complete, yet charged with breathless expectation. Holmes spoke clearly, voice level. "If you can hear me, strike once." There came, after a moment, a single tap. Latham fell to his knees. "Father! My godfather!" Holmes seized him by the shoulder. "Do not speak the name. Whoever answers may use it." He turned to Higby. The church bell roped. "How close to the vault?" "Just above, sir. The belfry's shaft runs behind that wall." "Then someone could descend from the bell chamber to this tomb unseen," said Holmes. "A hollow channel sound would travel. Watson, do you recall the A note's instruction?" "Ring twice," I said. Holmes smiled thinly. "Exactly so, not to summon the dead, but to signal the living in the passage above, a partner in deception." He replaced the slab carefully. "We shall not disturb it further for now." Latham rose unsteadily. "Then my father?" "Remains where he was laid," said Holmes. "The impostor merely uses his grave as theatre." The man's relief was immediate, then curiously hesitant. "But who would torment me so?" Holmes wiped his hands. "To draw you here repeatedly, perhaps until your reason breaks or until something of value changes ownership. You said the ledgers were buried?" "Yes, under his coffin. Then our culprit has been excavating under cover of superstition. The laughter of ghosts conceals the scratch of thieves." A tremor of anger shook Latham. "Then open it now and end this charade." "Patience," said Holmes. "Our quarry listens even now." better he believes his stage is intact. He glanced upward, and the morning bell struck again, the deep tone vibrating through the mist. Between those vibrations a low creak sounded wood against stone. Holmes's gaze darted toward the church tower. "Ah," he murmured, "the accomplice descends. Watson, come!" We hurried around the north side of the church. There, half hidden by ivy, stood a small iron door flush with the tower wall. Holmes tested the latch. It moved easily. We entered a narrow spiral passage, smelling of dust and oil. The air quivered faintly with that same metallic rhythm. Halfway down, Holmes stopped and pointed to the wall. Faint lines were scored into the plaster, 2 vertical scratches, then 1 diagonal. "A mark of alignment," he whispered. "Someone measures distance to the vault by sound." A whisper drifted up from below, words too faint to distinguish, followed by the sharp tap of metal on stone. Holmes descended faster. The passage widened into a crypt-like chamber lit by a single lantern. There, crouched beside an open hatch in the floor, was a woman in mourning black. Her veil had fallen back, revealing a pale, intelligent face and eyes that glistened with defiance. When she saw us, she froze, then rose with surprising calm. "You're too late," she said. Holmes inclined his head. "Miss or Mrs.?" "Mrs. Carrow. I was my father's secretary." "And his accomplice," Holmes said quietly. "You forged the letters?" Her smile flickered. "For justice. Arthur Latham destroyed my husband with false accounts. Those ledgers buried with him prove it." Holmes's tone softened. "And so you resurrected the scandal by masquerading as his ghost. Ingenious, but fatal." "Fatal?" she whispered. Holmes pointed to the floor. "Your companion beneath has not moved since the last signal. If he sought the ledgers, the air would have suffocated him." For the first time, her poise broke. "No!" she gasped, dropping to her knees beside the hatch. "Henry!" She grasped the edge and called again, but the echo that answered was a single, dull tap-funnel, hollow. Holmes laid a hand on her shoulder. "You see, the dead." "Do smile, Mrs. Carrow, but not as you imagined." Her tears came then sharp as glass. Holmes's face was unreadable as he signalled me to close the hatch. "We must summon the constable," I murmured. "In due course," he said. "First, the ledgers. They will tell us whose grave this truly is." Above us, the bell tolled once more, its echo trembling through stone and silence alike. Between those dying vibrations, another faint tap answered from the darkness, softer now, almost affectionate, as though the case itself had not quite finished speaking. Holmes knelt by the hatch without a word, the lantern's flame trembling in the draught. The faint tap had faded to silence, leaving only the hollow throb of the bell above us. Mrs. Carrow crouched near him, pale and shaking, her veil trembling with every breath. Holmes's tone, when it came, was as measured as the beat of a clock. "Watson, your assistance. We must lift him." I obeyed at once. Together we raised the wooden cover and peered into the recess beneath. The smell of earth and mildew was overpowering. A man lay there, his body half buried in loosened soil, one gloved hand still clutching a small spade, the other curled beside a cracked tin box. His eyes were open, staring in glassy confusion. Mrs. Carrow cried out and turned away. Holmes examined the body briefly, his gaze calm. As I feared. Suffocation. The vault's air was poor to begin with and sealed tighter when he replaced the lid from below. He risked all for these. He pointed to the tin box. Its hinges had corroded, but Holmes pried them free with the blade of his knife. Within lay a bundle of ledgers bound by fraying cord, their pages spotted with damp, but still legible. The ink, once neat, had blurred into dark rivulets, like veins of guilt bleeding through the paper. Latham, who had followed us tremblingly into the chamber, spoke at last. My father's hand. Those are his accounts. Holmes straightened, his expression neither triumphant nor accusing. Then the dead have been exhumed twice, once by thieves, once by truth. He opened the top ledger and skimmed a page. Watson, note this entry loans to Carrow and Finch dated 2 years prior. Figures altered in margin. Tell me, Mr. Latham, was your father ever known for generosity? He was meticulous, Latham murmured. Meticulous men seldom leave ink smudges, Holmes replied. Mrs. Carrow, your husband was accused of embezzlement, I believe? She lifted her head slowly, eyes red but steady. Accused and dismissed. He took his own life before trial. Your friend's father forged those sums to save his reputation. Holmes nodded gravely. Then your vengeance, though clumsily executed, was not without root. Latham's voice cracked. This cannot be true. My father was human, Holmes said gently, and men defend their names more fiercely than their souls. The words seemed to hollow the chamber. The only sound was the drip of moisture and the faint echo of our breathing. Holmes closed the ledger, securing it once more within the box. We shall carry this to Baker Street. Scotland Yard may quarrel with our methods, but not with arithmetic. Mrs. Carrow clutched her veil. Will you give me no mercy, Mr. Holmes? I did not mean for him to die. Mercy, Holmes replied, belongs to those who tell the truth before it is found. He regarded her for a long moment. Still, I believe the court will see your motive as passion, not malice. You sought to expose deceit, not to kill. She wept silently. Holmes replaced the hatch and stood. Watson, fetch the constable. I shall await him here. But before I could move, a sudden tremor ran through the tower stones. The bell above groaned once, the chain clattering faintly. Tap, tap. Holmes froze. The sound again, I whispered. He nodded, listening. But now from above, not below. We exchanged a glance, then ascended swiftly, leaving Latham and Mrs. Carrow behind in the crypt. The spiral stair was narrow and dark, the echo of our footsteps merging with that metallic rhythm. At last we reached the belfry, a circular space filled with ropes and shadow. The bell hung motionless, yet one of the ropes swayed as though touched by invisible hands. Holmes examined it closely, weighted from beneath. See the loop tied midway? Someone rigged a false signal by pulling this from the crypt. A conspirator could make the bell's clapper strike faintly without sounding a full peal. Ingenious, I frowned. But the man below is dead, then someone else has taken his place, Holmes said. A board creaked behind us. We turned together, and there stood Latham, breathless, face ashen. Holmes, I began. How? He raised a hand. Let him speak. Latham's voice came low, almost broken. I heard her confess about my father. You must understand I did not know. No, said Holmes, but you feared it. Latham gripped the rope. You cannot comprehend what it is to live beneath a name crumbling from within. I only wanted, Holmes's gaze hardened, to preserve honor by falsehood. A family disease, it seems. Latham flinched. Do you think I like him? I think you are more dangerous, Holmes said quietly. He buried his sin. You would resurrect it to destroy others. Did you not supply Mrs. Carrow with your father's grave key? Latham's silence was answer enough. Holmes's tone softened again, almost pitying. The hand that struck the marble, Mr. Latham, was yours. You used her grief as your cover, but your accomplice suffocated before completing your plan. Now you must answer for 2 deaths. The rope trembled in Latham's grasp. No! He looked wildly toward the open window where the fog rolled in, the city dim below. I wanted the ledgers destroyed, not stolen, I swear it. Holmes stepped closer. Then let the truth destroy or save you. It is the only executioner. Latham's eyes flicked to the rope again. For a dreadful instant I thought he meant to throw himself from the tower. but Holmes seized his arm. The man sagged, defeated, and the rope fell slack, striking the floor with a final, hollow tap. Holmes looked down at it, then back to me. The motif concludes itself, Watson. Every echo finds silence at last. We descended without speaking. In the crypt below, Mrs. Carrow had composed herself, the veil drawn once more. She did not look up as we passed. Holmes handed the tin box to me. "Take it," he said quietly. "We carry neither guilt nor absolution, only proof." As we emerged into the pale morning, the last toll of the bell drifted over the graves. Between its fading tones came one faint, metallic whisper, as if the city itself exhaled tap. Holmes halted on the path. "Did you hear, Watson?" "Yes," I said, "but I think it came from the carriage road." He smiled thinly. "Good. Then the living still have business left." A handsome cab waited beyond the church gate, its horse shifting impatiently in the mist. Holmes moved toward it without pause, his long coat trailing, while I followed, still holding the tin box that seemed to pulse faintly against my arm like a living heart. The driver touched his cap. "You sent for me, sir?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Indeed, I did not. Yet your presence seems providential. Whom did you expect to convey?" The man frowned. "Mr. Latham, sir. Told me to wait here after the bell." Holmes's lips curved slightly. "After the bell. A prearranged signal, then, and did he instruct where to go?" "Yes, sir. To the docks, Pier 7. Holmes turned to me, the faint tapping of the horse's hooves echoing against the paving stones. "Watson, the rhythm continues. It leads us onward." He handed me into the cab, took the seat opposite, and spoke crisply to the driver. "Drive on. Slowly. Mind no need to alarm our quarry." As the wheels began their steady clop-clop-tap, the tin box rattled softly against the floorboards. Holmes regarded it as though listening to another's heartbeat. "You observe, Watson," he said quietly, "that every falsehood leaves a rhythm first struck by the liar, then echoed by the world. It is the only music we need to follow. Do you believe Latham arranged an escape?" "Not escape," Holmes replied. "Completion. His accomplice's death has forced his hand. There is yet an element unaccounted for, something beyond revenge or concealment. That carriage did not arrive by accident. The streets blurred past, slick with rain, the gas lamps floating like drowned stars." Holmes leaned forward suddenly and tapped the roof twice with his cane. The cab halted. "Driver," he called, "how long have you waited?" "An hour, sir." The gentleman paid in advance. Holmes handed him a shilling. "Good. You will remain here for 10 minutes, then proceed home. Tell no one whom you carried." The man blinked. "Very good, sir." Holmes stepped down and gestured for me to follow. We stood before a narrow alley between warehouses where the river mist rolled in thick folds. From somewhere within came the faint creak of a loading crane and the distant toll of a buoy bell, 2 notes apart, perfectly matching the interval Holmes had fixed upon since morning. He smiled. Faintly. "Even the river keeps time, Watson. Come." We advanced down the passage until the outline of another carriage emerged from the fog closed, with its lanterns dimmed. A figure sat inside. Holmes moved nearer, silent as shadow, and peered through the grimy glass. Ah, the conductor himself. He opened the door without ceremony. Inside sat Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, his expression torn between relief and exasperation. "Holmes, by heaven, I might have known you'd appear out of the mist like a stage ghost." Holmes inclined his head. "One must follow the sound, Inspector. You have been on Latham's trail, I presume." Lestrade gestured toward the river. "We had word of documents being sold from the old Latham firm, figures wanted by half the exchange. My men traced them here. Then you appear, and I begin to suspect we're 2 verses behind your melody." Holmes smiled thinly. You are nearer the refrain than you imagine. He motioned for me to place the tin box on the seat. Behold the ledgers themselves, proof that Arthur Latham forged accounts to ruin Carow and Finch. But their exhumation is not the end. Lestrade stared. Then what the devil remains? Holmes leaned close, voice low. The purchaser, Inspector. These documents were to change hands tonight at Pier 7. Someone of means and fear who would pay dearly to suppress them. Latham was no longer merely preserving a name, he was bargaining for silence. Blackmail? Lestrade asked. Precisely. He played victim and avenger in one breath. Lestrade whistled softly. And you think he's coming here? Holmes glanced toward the fog-draped quay. He will come. The rhythm has not yet been resolved. We waited, the night breathing around us. The sound of oars approached, measured, steady, each stroke ending in a faint tap as the blade struck wood. Out of the mist, a small boat emerged, guided by a man in a dark coat. A lantern swung at its prow, glowing like a captive ember. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Our finale begins. Latham stepped ashore, moving with the careful dignity of one rehearsing his own confession. Under his arm he carried a small parcel wrapped in oilskin. He turned at once toward the waiting carriage. "Stay still," Holmes whispered. "Let him speak first." Latham opened the door, half entering, before he froze at the sight of Holmes inside. His expression did not alter, but his voice trembled. "You were not meant to follow." "And yet here I am," Holmes said quietly. The music led us both. Latham set the parcel on his knee. "You cannot comprehend. Those ledgers, if made public, would ruin families, not merely mine. They are not evidence, but contagion." Holmes's gaze was steady. "Truth rarely ruins the innocent. What you call contagion is justice long delayed." Lestrade leaned forward. "You'll hand over that parcel, sir?" Latham hesitated, then passed it across. Holmes unwrapped the oilskin to reveal a second ledger, newer, cleaner, the ink fresh. "A forgery of the forgeries," Holmes murmured. "You meant to replace the true ledger with this counterfeit, burn the rest, and claim repentance." Latham's hands clenched. "I wanted peace. Can a man not bury sin twice?" Holmes's reply was almost gentle. "Peace cannot be buried, Mr. Latham. It must be earned." Lestrade rose. "That's enough sermonizing, Holmes. Mr. Latham, you'll come with us." For the first time, the man's composure broke. "Please," he whispered, "do not drag my father's name further through the mire." Holmes regarded him gravely. "You have mistaken the direction of the mire. Spirit was beneath your feet long before tonight." Latham looked out toward the river, its black surface broken by a drifting barge. "Then let it take me, as it took him." He made a sudden movement toward the quay. Lestrade lunged, but Holmes was faster, seizing his arm. "No, sir. The river cleanses nothing." Latham sagged, defeated. The faint tapping of the boat against the pilings echoed the rhythm we had followed from Baker Street. Holmes turned to me. "Do you hear, Watson? The same cadence is only slower now?" "Yes," I said, like a heartbeat ebbing. Holmes nodded once. The case dies with its own pulse. Lestrade signalled his men, and they led Latham away through the mist. The last sound we heard was the slow tap of his cane against the stones, diminishing until it merged with the toll of the buoy bell across the river, 2 notes apart, the same haunting interval that had begun it all. Holmes stood motionless beside me. "Do you perceive, Watson," he said softly, "how even guilt keeps time?" The bell answered once more, low and resonant, and beneath it came one more deliberate tapas, though something unseen had yet to finish the measure. Holmes remained motionless as the mist thinned, his face lit faintly by the quay lantern. The last tap still trembled in the air, neither sound nor memory, but something suspended between them. Then he turned sharply. "Watson, the ledger, quickly." I passed him the parcel. He unwrapped it with delicate precision, and the loose pages fluttered like pale leaves. "Do you see, Watson?" The handwriting was identical to the elder Latham's, but Holmes pointed to the margin where faint indentations showed beneath the ink. Observing the pen pressure varies only in the final entries. Someone traced this from beneath another page. Latham did not write this entire book, but he forged the earlier, or assisted in the forgery. Holmes replied. "There is a missing hand still unaccounted for." I frowned. "You mean Mrs. Carrow?" Holmes shook his head, too direct. She was a pawn of grief, not ambition. But someone else orchestrated both sides, someone who profits from truth, concealed and lies exposed alike. He looked toward the river, the fog swallowing the last gleam of lamplight. "The question, Watson, is who gains when the dead rise smiling?" Lestrade's voice broke in behind us. "If you're spinning riddles again, Holmes, make them quick. I've a prisoner to deliver." Holmes closed the ledger. "Send word to Scotland Yard that Mr. Latham is to be held without bail. He may yet be useful." "Useful?" Lestrade scoffed. "He's ruined, body and name both." "Ruined men talk freely," Holmes said, his eyes glittering. "Particularly when they believe confession will purchase dignity. Have him questioned about his father's partners who visited during the final weeks before his stroke." Lestrade grunted. "You've got something in mind." "I have a pattern," Holmes said quietly. "The rhythm has not resolved." He replaced the ledger in the oilskin, handed it to me, and started toward the waiting cab. "Come, Watson, we return to Baker Street. There is an echo I must measure." The ride back was long and silent, save for the steady tap-tap of hooves and the intermittent clang of a distant bell. 2 notes apart, like a riddle repeating itself. When we reached the familiar glow of our windows, dawn had begun to seep into the city, thin and colourless. Inside, Holmes went directly to his desk, spreading the ledgers across the blotter. He examined them beneath the lamplight, turning each page with gloved fingers. The faint scratch of paper seemed to mimic the earlier rhythm. He spoke without looking up. "Watson, you recall the first note found within Latham's cane ring twice. We interpreted it as an instruction, but consider, might it also be a name?" "A name?" He nodded. "Perhaps a cipher. 2 words, 2 rings?" "R-ing twice." "A signature, disguised as a phrase." I stared. "You mean there was someone called Ring?" "Not called signing." Holmes tapped the margin of the ledger. "Here, the initials R.I. appear beside the final audit. Yet no partner of that name existed in the firm's registry. Latham Sr. could not have added them. His stroke had left him nearly paralyzed. Someone else inserted them later. And that someone?" Holmes straightened, his gaze far away. "We shall see presently." He crossed to the fireplace, where the ashes of last night's logs still held a faint red core. From his drawer he took the hollow cane, now cleaned and reassembled, and struck it lightly against the hearthstone. The sound of a short, precise tap resonates deeper than wood should. "There, Watson. The same tone as before." He unscrewed the handle again and drew forth a second scrap of folded paper, this one thinner, almost translucent. Upon it, in fine script, were 4 words: "Pier 7 final proof." I let out a breath. Then the meeting tonight was arranged not by Latham, but by whoever placed that note. "Precisely," Holmes said. "And since Latham had no reason to conceal it within his own cane, we must assume the cane was exchanged." He turned, the silver head in his hand. "It bears an engraving small but deliberate. Read it." I leaned closer. The letters were nearly invisible. R. Inglis and Company's, instrument makers, Fenchurch Street. Holmes's eyes brightened. R. Inglis or R. Ing? It seems our phantom has a workshop. At that instant came a soft rap at the door, 3 quick knocks, then one slow, forming the same rhythm we had heard beneath. The grave. Holmes froze, his hand hovering above the table. "Enter," he said quietly. Mrs. Hudson appeared, pale and anxious. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes. Says it's urgent. Name?" He gave none, but he carries a cane silver-topped. Holmes's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Show him in." Moments later, the door opened to reveal a tall, sharp-featured man in a dark coat. His hair was iron grey, his expression calm, almost benevolent. Yet his cold, analytical eyes reminded me uncomfortably of Holmes himself. He leaned upon a cane identical to the one on our table. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice smooth. "I am Richard Inglis. I believe you have something belonging to me." Holmes regarded him steadily. "Indeed. But it seems your property has been making mischief. Objects are rarely guilty, Mr. Holmes." "Men are." Holmes gestured toward the fire. "Then let us discuss guilt plainly. You devised the signal, 2 rings, 2 notes, and set your agent below the church. You plan to recover the ledgers and sell them. Why involve the Lathams at all?" Inglis smiled faintly. "Because their name brought silence. A useful commodity in my line of work." "Blackmail," I said. He inclined his head. "Information management, Doctor. Your detective knows the difference." Holmes's eyes never left him. "The difference lies in conscience, sir." Inglis stepped forward, resting his cane on the hearth. The faint tap against the stone answered itself from the hollow tube upon the desk. "You are thorough, Mr. Holmes, but thoroughness can be fatal." Holmes moved slightly, interposing himself between the man and the desk. "I am acquainted with fatality, Mr. Inglis. It tends to visit the guilty first." The man's smile thinned. "You will regret," but the sentence never finished. From the cane in his hand came a sudden hiss, a puff of pale smoke. Holmes struck it aside. In an instant the smoke curled harmlessly toward the ceiling. "Poison capsule," he said calmly. "Ingenious, but ill-timed." Inglis lunged for the door, but I was there before him. Within seconds, Holmes had the man's wrist twisted behind him. The cane wrenched free. He handed it to me. "Another weapon disguised as rhythm, Watson. The man cannot speak without percussion." Lestrade burst in, alerted by the commotion. "Good Lord, what's happened now?" Holmes released his captive with a slight bow. "Inspector, allow me to present the composer of our Symphony of Deceit, Mr. Richard Inglis, purveyor of instruments and false resurrections." Inglis said nothing. Only the faint tick of the clock punctuated the silence, each beat mirroring the pulse of his jaw as he clenched it. Holmes turned toward the window where dawn broke across the city. "You see, Watson? The motif continues even here. The case beats on, but not yet to its conclusion." Outside, a distant bell chimed once then again, 2 notes apart, as though London itself were echoing his words. Holmes lifted his head, listening. "The rhythm," he murmured, "still waits for its final bar." Lestrade's men had Mr. Inglis in irons within minutes, yet the man's composure never faltered. He stood in our sitting room as though posing for a portrait, his eyes tracing the familiar clutter violin, chemical retorts and stacks of files, as if assessing the mind that had cornered him. Holmes watched in equal stillness, fingers pressed together. "You will forgive our hospitality, Mr. Inglis. The yard can be so impersonal." Inglis's tone was almost courteous. "I prefer precision to comfort, Mr. Holmes. Both of us trade, in fact yours merely costs less." Holmes's eyes narrowed a fraction. A confession disguised as an insult. You ran an enterprise that purchased secrets and resold silence. The Latham affair was one of your orchestras, each accomplice striking a note at your command. Inglis's lip curled. Commerce, sir. The world thrives upon the controlled disclosure of truth. What you call extortion, I call equilibrium. Lestrade snorted. You'll find your equilibrium at Newgate. Holmes lifted a hand. Patience, Inspector. There is more cadence left in our tune. He turned back to the prisoner. Why forge the message ring twice? Why that phrase? Inglis's gaze flicked toward the window where the morning fog pressed like frosted glass. Because rhythm endures where words decay. Sound is memory. Each client heard the signal differently. Bell, hammer, cane, but always twice. It was the measure of my discretion. The measure of your vanity, Holmes replied. You found poetry in corruption. The man smiled faintly. You would understand, Mr. Holmes, you listen for patterns in souls as I do in scandals. Holmes regarded him in silence. Then he said softly, No, sir. I listen for redemption. You only repetition. For the first time, Inglis's expression changed an almost imperceptible tightening of the jaw. He looked toward Lestrade. Am I to be charged now, or must I endure philosophy as well? Holmes answered for him. Charged, certainly, but before that one curiosity remains. You carry 2 canes, identical in form. One we seized tonight, another was left at the churchyard. Why replicate your own weapon? Inglis hesitated. Efficiency. Each held a capsule, one for protection, one for persuasion. Poison and ink, Holmes murmured. Death or signature, depending on the need. He stepped closer. And which did you intend for Mr. Latham? The man's smile returned, brittle as glass. Both. A man who writes confessions and drinks from the same pen spares everyone trouble. Holmes drew in a long breath. So the grave was your stage, the bells your cue, and guilt your refrain. Remarkable in its ugliness. Inglis's eyes glinted. You dislike ugliness because you fear resemblance. Enough, Lestrade barked. Your march. But Holmes raised a hand again. One last measure, Inspector. Mr. Inglis, you arranged these affairs through intermediaries. Caro, Latham, perhaps others, who supplied you with access to their finances. A man of the exchange cannot operate alone. Gash. Prisoner's silence was enough. Holmes's gaze sharpened. You hesitate because he is still free. I hesitate, said Inglis evenly, because freedom is relative. Holmes studied him for a long moment, then turned to Lestrade. Keep him at the yard under close watch. No correspondence, no visitors. His accomplice will move soon to silence him. When he does, you will hear the same rhythm. 2 strikes, a pause. That will be your warning. Lestrade nodded grimly. Understood. When they had gone, the door closed upon a hush so profound that even the city seemed to hold its breath. Holmes walked to the fireplace, stirred the embers with the poker, and spoke without looking up. There is another hand, Watson, someone higher, wealthier, who employed Inglis to cleanse records beyond the Latham affair. These ledgers were bait, not plunder. I sat opposite him, exhausted. Then what purpose did any of this serve? To flush out the unseen patron, he said. Inglis fancied himself a conductor, but he was merely the instrument. The true composer has yet to show his face. He tapped the poker lightly against the great tap-tap. The iron answered with a hollow tone. Hear it? Even in silence, the interval persists. I managed a weary smile. You speak as though London itself keeps your rhythm. Holmes looked up sharply. Perhaps it does. Listen. From the street below came the measured strike of a carriage wheel against cobblestones once, twice, then the faint jingle of harness. It slowed before our door. Holmes straightened. Our encore arrives precisely on time. He crossed to the window, drew aside the curtain, and peered down. a black brougham, unmarked. The driver waits but does not descend. Someone sent to retrieve Inglis? I asked. More likely to erase him, Holmes said. Observing the light behind the driver's seat, flickers blue. That is the phosphor of the same chemical mixture found in the Keynes capsule. Before I could speak, a soft tap sounded at the downstairs bell. Once, pause, then again. Holmes's eyes flashed. The pattern. He moved swiftly, motioning me toward the door. Watson, remain behind me. The next act may prove abrupt. We descended the stairs noiselessly. The street door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap I saw the shadow of the waiting carriage. The air carried that same metallic tang we had smelled in the cryptochemical deliberate. Holmes swung the door wide. A figure stood on the step, a woman, in a dark travelling cloak, her face veiled. She held a sealed envelope in one gloved hand. "For Mr. Holmes," she said, voice low but steady. He took it without flinching. "And from whom, madam?" "From a gentleman who smiles at his grave." The phrase struck like a blow. Holmes's hand tightened on the envelope. "You will tell your master," he said, "that I have deciphered his rhythm." She inclined her head slightly. He expected nothing less. Before either of us could stop her, she turned, entered the carriage, and was gone. The wheels struck the stones once, twice, before fading into the night. Holmes broke the seal. Inside lay a single card, blank, save for the faint imprint of a signet ring. A smiling mask surrounded by two concentric circles. Beneath it, in pencil, 3 words, "Next toll midnight." He looked up, eyes bright with grim excitement. "Watson," the motif continues, "we are summoned again to the source this time." The clock on the mantel struck the 1/4 hour. Between each note of its chime, the silence deepened until the last tone quivered and died. Then, faint and unmistakable, came one more echo from the street outside Tap Tapas, if the city itself awaited our answer. Holmes stared at the card for a long moment, the faint pencil marks catching the lamplight like veins of mercury. Then he folded it once and slipped it into his pocket. "Watson," he said quietly, "we are invited to a performance last act, perhaps. Midnight." I looked at the clock. "Barely 5 hours from now. Where?" He smiled without mirth. "The phrase, 'next toll,' is no metaphor. The only bell that tolls at midnight in that interval we've followed 2 notes apartis, St. Olaves." "The same church?" "The same stage," he said. "Only the script has changed. We must be ready when the curtain rises." He paced the room, fingertips pressed together, every movement tuned to some inner metronome. Inglis is the key the composer left behind. Whoever directs this symphony of deceit wishes to reclaim him before dawn. I hesitated. "You think they mean to kill him?" "I think they mean to finish the rhythm," Holmes replied. 2 strokes, one begun in the grave, the other to end it. The clock's pendulum ticked between us like a heartbeat. "We go armed?" I asked. "Armed with understanding, my dear fellow," he said. "It seldom misfires." He paused by the window. "Still, the revolver in your drawer will not offend me." The rest of the evening passed in measured silence. Holmes worked methodically, comparing inks from the ledgers, examining the mask embossed on the card, tracing with a compass the twin circles that framed its grin. At last he said, "Notice the curvature, not ornamental, but geographical. 2 rings, 2 parishes intersecting at one point. St. Olave's?" He nodded. "And its neighbouring ground, St. Bride's. Between them lies a disused crypt, once shared by both congregations during the plague years. It was sealed, but never forgotten. Midnight tolls for more than the dead tonight." At 12:15, we left Baker Street in a closed cab, our breath fogging the windows. The city lay half asleep, its lamps shrouded in drizzle. As we neared the river, the familiar sound returned to the driver's whip against the shaft, the echo of hoofbeats doubling it in eerie harmony. Holmes sat upright, eyes fixed ahead. "You hear it, Watson?" The motif obeys its own gravity. We are being drawn to the point of origin. The bell of St. Olave is loomed above the fog, a black crown upon the skyline. We disembarked at the narrow lane beside the graveyard wall. A constable stood waiting, lantern in hand. "Orders from Inspector Lestrade, sir," he said. "Keep watch on the north gate. No one to pass without your leave." "Excellent," Holmes murmured. "You may earn your commendation tonight or lose your courage." We slipped through the smaller gate, the path gleaming with wet stone. The air smelled of lime and iron. Somewhere beneath, water trickled through forgotten drains. Holmes led the way to the tower door, where a faint line of light seeped through the jamb. He gestured for silence, then pressed his ear to the wood. Inside, footsteps moved in slow, deliberate cadence pauses and tapped the same measured signal that had haunted us from the beginning. Holmes whispered. One figure. Waiting. He turned the latch. The door creaked open. A single lantern burned upon the flagstones, throwing long shadows up the walls. Beside it stood a coffin-shaped crate, open and empty. At its edge, half in darkness, knelt a man. Holmes stepped forward. "Mr. Latham." The figure rose. His clothes were dishevelled, his eyes hollow yet strangely calm. "I thought you would come," he said. Holmes's tone was measured. "The invitation was yours?" "I sent it," he admitted. "Inglis will not live till morning." "Then he is dead already?" "Dying," said Latham. "He thought himself safe under your watch, but his drink was touched long before the yard claimed him. The poison in his cane needed only air." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "So you, not Inglis, wrote the final act?" Latham's smile was ghostly. "I wrote nothing, Mr. Holmes. I only let the rhythm finish itself. Two tolls, father and son." I took a step toward him. "You are confessing to murder, to justice," he said softly. "He destroyed my father's honor. I only gave him his due." Holmes's voice carried neither pity nor condemnation. "And the mask? The card? You left them?" Latham looked down. "The mask was my father's signet. The smile, his defense against disgrace. Now it guards me too." Holmes regarded him for a long breath. "You cannot exercise shame by echoing it." "Then let the bell decide," said Latham. He lifted the lantern and turned toward the rope that hung from the tower beam. "At midnight it tolls. Once for him, once for me." Holmes moved swiftly. "No, sir." But Latham pulled the cord with a sudden motion. The bell above us boomed once, deep and terrible. Dust fell from the rafters and the very air shook. He raised the rope again. Holmes caught his arm. "Enough!" Latham struggled weakly. "Let it end. 2 strokes, then silence." The bell's clapper swung once more before Holmes could wrench the rope free. The sound reverberated through the church, rolling outward over the river like thunder. When it died, Latham sagged against the wall, the lantern slipping from his hand. "It's done," he murmured. He smiles no more. Holmes knelt beside him, feeling for a pulse. His expression hardened. "Watson has the same poison. He sealed his fate before we arrived." I bent to examine the man. His lips bore a faint trace of bluish stain. The cane lay beside him, its silver head unscrewed, the hollow chamber empty. Holmes rose slowly. The interval completes itself, death answering death. The constable burst through the doorway, alarmed by the bell. Good Lord, what happened? Holmes gestured for quiet. "The performance has concluded. Take note of the hour midnight precisely." As the man ran for assistance, Holmes turned toward me, voice low. "Do you hear, Watson? No echo follows. For the first time since this began, silence keeps its own time. Yet even as he spoke, the great bell trembled once more, an unbidden third stroke, faint but distinct, rolling through the stones like breath returning to a corpse. Holmes froze, his eyes lifting toward the belfry. 3 tolls, he whispered. Impossible. The rope is still. The lantern flickered somewhere above. A loose beam gave a gentle tap-tap, as though unseen hands continued the music neither man had meant to finish. Holmes looked up into the shadows. It seems the city has not yet played its final note. Holmes was already halfway up the narrow stair before I found my footing. The reverberation of that unbidden third toll still pulsed through the stones like a living heartbeat. I followed, the lantern swinging wild shadows along the wall as we climbed. The belfry yawned above us, empty, silent, yet vibrating faintly as though some invisible hand had touched its iron heart. Holmes moved straight to the bell rope, examined its frayed edge, then looked up through the trap. It wasn't the mechanism, he said. Something struck from without. Wind, I ventured. He shook his head. The night is still. Listen. The silence pressed close. Then, faint and unmistakable, came a slow metallic tap-tap from somewhere above the bell itself. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "We have an uninvited performer, Watson." We ascended again, emerging into the exposed platform just below the spire. The fog rolled thick across the Thames, and the moon made it luminous like breath over glass. Against that pale sea of vapour stood a solitary figure, cloak snapping in the wind. Holmes raised the lantern. "You may descend safely, madam," he said evenly. The figure turned. It was the veiled woman from Baker Street, the messenger of the midnight card. In her hand she held a short iron mallet, its head glistening. "Your signal was punctual," she said, "as he intended." Holmes's voice remained calm. "You refer to Latham?" "To the one who smiled first," she replied. "Arthur Latham." I took a step forward. "He has been dead for weeks." She laughed softly. "Then death must be generous with its letters." Holmes watched her closely. "You are not here to mourn. I am here to finish the measure." She struck the bell's rim once with the mallet. The sound rolled downward, vast and hollow. 3 tolls complete the requiem. He demanded it. Holmes advanced slowly, each word precise. "And who are you to speak to?" She lowered her veil. The lamplight caught her face gaunt, lined with bitterness, yet bearing an uncanny resemblance to the late Arthur Latham. "His sister," she said. "Eliza Latham. I started, but the record she had no surviving family. Because I was erased," she said, "cast out when I exposed his fraud to my husband. He called it disloyalty. I called it the truth, and he silenced me with lies." Holmes studied her with grave fascination. "So you sent Inglis to bury his sins?" "I funded Inglis," she admitted. "He promised discretion." Then he began to play both sides, to sell the evidence, to twist the story. When my nephew joined him, the farce became intolerable. Her hand trembled around the mallet. I wanted them to feel what I felt, the weight of stone, the echo of their own deceit. "By haunting your brother's grave," said Holmes, "by reminding the world that the dead speak when the living lie." Her words broke against the wind, half defiant, half despairing. Holmes's tone softened, almost paternal. "You've orchestrated this from the shadows, the forged letters, the signals, the midnight summons. You wished for a confession written in fear." She met his gaze steadily. "And I have it. He confessed tonight to his life." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "Justice, Miss Latham, when self-administered, becomes its own corruption." Her expression faltered, revealing the exhaustion beneath. "You think I'm evil?" "I think you are human," Holmes said quietly.
Too human for the music you've written. The third toll was not his voice, but yours. For the first time, she hesitated. Then perhaps I can silence it. She lifted the mallet again, as if to hurl it into the abyss below. Holmes stepped forward sharply. No, leave the rhythm unbroken. It is all that keeps you alive. The mallet slipped from her grasp and fell, vanishing into fog. A long pause followed, broken only by the faint echo of its impact far below. Holmes touched her arm gently. Come, Miss Latham. The constable awaits below. The truth will not bury you tonight. She looked at him with sudden weariness. You speak as if truth were mercy. It is seldom merciful, said Holmes, but it ends with repetition. She allowed him to guide her toward the stair. We descended slowly, the echo of our steps mingling with the lingering hum of the bell. At the base, Lestrade had returned with 2 officers. He stared at the woman in astonishment. Another Latham. Good Lord, they breed like riddles. Holmes ignored him. Take her gently, Inspector. She has endured more than any cell can hold. Lestrade frowned. She'll need to answer for this business. She will, Holmes said, but not to you. The woman said nothing as they led her away. Only when the door closed did Holmes exhale deeply, resting a hand on the cold marble of the vault. The rhythm concludes itself, Watson, he murmured. 3 tolls, the living, the dead, and the conscience between them. I looked toward the tower. Then it is finished? Holmes gave a slow shake of the head. Listen. Outside, through the thick mist, a faint sound reached us, not the bell this time, but a rhythmic clatter from the street, the
approach of a carriage. Another visitor? I asked. Perhaps the final listener? Holmes replied. He turned toward the door, his eyes bright once more with that peculiar gleam I had come to know, the look of a man who hears truth before it is spoken. The carriage drew nearer, its wheels striking the cobbles in perfect cadence, tap, tap, a measured rhythm that matched the pattern we had followed from the beginning. Holmes smiled faintly. The motif returns to its source. I watched the fog swallow the sound as it approached the gate. And who plays it now? Holmes's expression darkened. Someone who believes the symphony is unfinished. The carriage stopped. A soft knock echoed on the church door. 2 strokes. A pause. Holmes turned his head toward me. Watson, you may wish to keep your revolver ready. I suspect the composer has come to collect his music. Holmes moved first, unfastening the great bolt with a motion as fluid as breath. The hinges groaned softly, and the door swung open upon a figure backlit by the carriage lamp-store, cloaked, gloved, his face obscured by the brim of a hat, gleaming faintly with rain. The glow behind him burned like twin halos, so that for an instant he seemed carved from shadow and fire alike. Holmes said, very quietly, "You are late for your own finale, sir." The stranger removed his hat. The features revealed were an angular, refined, almost ascetic man of 50 perhaps, with eyes that caught every movement like a lens. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said evenly, "I feared the orchestra might begin without its conductor." Holmes's lips tightened. "Your rhythm betrays you, Mr. Venn." The name startled me. Venn, the financier. I recall reading of him in connection with the exchange frauds. Holmes nodded. "Indeed, the invisible investor behind Arthur Latham's insurance empire, the man who profited from both ruin and recovery." Venn smiled thinly. "Profited, yes. That is a sin only the unsuccessful condemn." "You purchased Inglis's service," Holmes continued. "You paid him to retrieve the ledgers that would have proved your manipulation of the firm's accounts. But when he discovered their value, he turned against you, and you turned to Latham's despair to silence him." Venn's voice was calm. "Business requires adjustment." English was useful until he believed himself indispensable. Then you orchestrated the entire charade, Holmes said. The smiling corpse, the phantom bell, the ghostly sister, each movement written to distract suspicion from the true composer. The financier inclined his head, as if to a compliment. Art demands structure. Besides, I enjoyed the symmetry guilt echoed across generations. Lestrade, who had re-entered from the side aisle, bristled. You admit to it, then? Ven's gaze flicked to him. I admit only to order. Disorder is a crime. Holmes's expression did not change. Order built upon deceit is an edifice of glass, and you have left fingerprints upon every pane. The man laughed softly. Do you imagine, Mr. Holmes, that the law can touch me? The ledgers are as the witness is dead or discredited. You have nothing but rhythm and metaphor. Ah, said Holmes, but rhythm, Mr. Venn, is evidence when one knows how to read it. He gestured toward the tower. That third toll, the unbidden note, was not supernatural. It was the vibration of a concealed detonator wired to the bell frame, set to discharge should anyone interfere with your affairs. Latham triggered it unknowingly when he pulled the rope. Your work, I presume? Ven's smile thinned, a precaution. Holmes stepped closer, his tone sharpening. And its companion device remains in your carriage even now, primed to erase the final witness you. For the first time, a flicker of alarm crossed Ven's face. Nonsense. Then allow me to demonstrate, Holmes said. He turned to Lestrade. Inspector, if you please, search beneath the driver's bench. Lestrade hesitated only a moment before hurrying out. We waited, the silence thick as the fog beyond. Then came his voice, muffled but triumphant. By the saints, there's a wired case here, clockwork, mercury switch. Holmes's tone remained cool. Your device would have destroyed the carriage and any documents within the instant the wheels struck uneven ground. You intended to vanish yourself, leaving only the echo of mystery. Ven's composure shattered. You meddling Holmes, cut him off. Spare us repetition, sir. You have played your notes and the composition is finished. The financier drew a revolver from beneath his cloak sleek, nickel-plated, almost elegant. Then allow me one coda. Holmes did not flinch. You will not fire. The percussion cap would ignite the powder residue upon your gloves, the faint glimmer. It would betray you even in the dark. Venn hesitated, gaze dropping involuntarily to his hand. In that instant, Holmes moved a deft twist, a blow to the wrist, and the weapon clattered to the floor. Lestrade burst back in, the explosive device cradled gingerly in both hands. We've got the devil's own fireworks here. Holmes took it, turning the mechanism delicately. Fascinating. 2 timing rods like bell hammers, the same interval 2 strokes, a pause. Even your bombs obeyed your vanity. Ven's voice was hoarse. You understand nothing. The world lives by tempo, profit, loss, death, rebirth. I merely conducted the inevitable. Holmes regarded him with a strange melancholy, and I merely listened for dissonance. He gestured for Lestrade's men to take the prisoner. Treat him carefully, Inspector. He has a gift for timing. As they led Venn away, the man turned once more toward Holmes. You may silence me, but you cannot silence the rhythm. It will find you, too. Holmes met his gaze without blinking. Then I shall keep my ear to the ground. The door closed on the echo of Ven's boots along the aisle, steady, unrepentant. The constable's carriage wheels clattered away in the fog. Holmes remained standing where he was, staring at the dark bell frame above. Watson, he said softly, even the most rational architecture can resemble music when it collapses. I touched his arm. The pattern is broken. It's over. He shook his head. No pattern ends cleanly, my friend. There is always a reverberation. As if to answer, the wind stirred the bell rope overhead. It swung once, striking the bronze lightly tapped into a full toll. merely an echo trembling on the edge of sound. Holmes looked upward, listening, until the vibration died. "There," he murmured. "The city exhales." We turned toward the door, the fog beyond alive with the faintest glimmer of dawn. For the first time in hours, I felt the weight of the case lift. Yet Holmes's eyes remained distant, fixed on the bell that had sung its strange requiem. "The rhythm may cease," he said quietly, "but its silence must still be read." The final note hung between us, then faded into the hush of the river and the slow creak of settling timbers, each sound merging into that haunting cadence that had followed us from the beginning. Tap, pause, tap. Holmes's hand tightened briefly on my shoulder. "Come, Watson, the last movement awaits." We left the church as dawn bled pale through the fog, the faintest shimmer of rose across the Thames. Holmes did not speak until we reached the waiting cab, and even then his words were scarcely above a whisper. "The city exhales, Watson, but never rests." I followed his gaze toward the river, where the tide lapped faintly against the embankment. The sound was rhythm made liquid, the same twin beats softened now, dissolving in water. "Do you suppose Ven's philosophy held any truth?" I asked. He regarded me sidelong. "Do men live by rhythm? Undeniably, that they must repeat it unto ruin, not while there remains conscience." We entered the cab, and for a while only the muffled wheels spoke. Holmes leaned back, eyes half-closed, his long fingers steepled. The fatigue upon him was physical but also moral, the quiet after a storm too intricate to admire. "Watson," he said at last, "do you recall the interval between bells? The silence I told you was where truth hides." "Yes, it has haunted me ever since." He smiled faintly. "It is not mere fancy. All deception depends upon noise, upon distraction, rhythm, repetition. Truth, on the contrary, resides in pause. Eliza Latham discovered it too late." "She believed herself avenging a wrong," I said. "Precisely. But vengeance is music that deafens its composer. Her brother's deceit, her nephew's weakness, Inglis's cunning, Ven's ambition, each sought mastery of the same refrain. And yet all were enslaved by it." He opened the window, letting the morning air sweep through. "Observe, Watson, how the world already forgets. The fog lifts, commerce resumes, and those who heard the bells in terror will call them imagination by noon. That indifference troubles you." "It consoles me," he said quietly. "For if humanity forgot nothing, it could not forgive itself." The cab turned into Baker Street, now alive with the stirrings of ordinary life, vendors, newsboys, the first clatter of hooves. We entered our familiar rooms to find Mrs. Hudson already laying the breakfast tray. Holmes dismissed her with a word and went straight to the mantelpiece, where the salvaged ledgers and the empty silver cane lay side by side like instruments retired after performance. He tapped the cane once against the grate. Tap, then again, tap. I winced. "You mean to keep that sound as a souvenir?" He smiled faintly. "As a reminder, the resonance of guilt is best studied in its quiet form." We sat. The warmth of the fire restored colour to his features, and for the first time that night I saw the satisfaction of closure upon him tempered, not triumphant. "Lestrade will see Ven," I said. "Inglis is dead, Latham gone, his aunt confined to care. There is no one left to play the final note." Holmes shook his head. "There is always someone. The conductor departs, the orchestra endures, but we have at least changed the tempo." He drew a paper from his pocket, the card that had summoned us to the church. "Note the pencil strokes," he said, 2 circles enclosing the smile. I measured them before we left the inner circumference, and the outer differ precisely by the ratio of time between the second and third toll. It was Ven's private cipher, a mathematical concept marking each stage of his enterprise, Even in deceit he sought symmetry. I studied it. Then the third toll truly was his. His design, yes, Holmes said, but not his intent. He meant destruction, and fate made it confession. He folded the card once more and tossed it into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and collapsed to ash. For a long while we watched the embers. Outside, a costermonger's bell clanged distantly, sharp, off-key, and yet strangely fitting. "Do you think," I asked, "that rhythm governs all crime?" Holmes considered. "Not crime, Watson, life. Every act, noble or vile, repeats something ancient in the heart. The detective merely hears it sooner." He rose, moving to the violin that rested upon its stand. Music and detection are the same pursuit, to impose order upon discord, to find within noise the whisper of design. He drew the bow across the strings once, softly, tentatively. The note quivered in the room like breath held too long, then settled into stillness. "Even silence has pitch," he murmured. "That is what they forget." I watched him in that gentle light, the case still heavy on my mind. "You pit intellect against evil, Holmes, yet you speak as though evil were merely off tempo." He smiled faintly, eyes upon the strings. "Perhaps it is. Perhaps every soul is an instrument that falls out of tune." And the warmth in his tone surprised me. It carried the weight of pity, not disdain. For all his sharpness, there was compassion in him that surfaced only when the hunt was done. He set the violin aside, crossed to the window, and looked down upon the street. "The city beats on, Watson, its hoofbeats, its chimneys, its hearts. Each tap is a reminder that existence itself is the grand percussion. We cannot silence it, we can only choose our measure." The morning sun broke through the thinning fog, striking the polished head of the cane upon the mantel. It gleamed like the first clean note after dissonance. Holmes noticed it too. "There you see. Even deceit can catch the light for an instant before it fades." He turned back to me with the weary gentleness I had seen after only the hardest cases. "You will write this one, I trust? If the world would believe it." "Belief," he said, "is only the echo of truth delayed." Outside, a clock struck the half-hour too clear notes, a pause between. Holmes inclined his head slightly as though to an old acquaintance. "The interval again," he murmured, still speaking. Then he smiled faintly and reached for his coffee. "Let us not answer it this time." I nodded, but even as we sat in silence, the rhythm seemed to linger. The faint tick of the clock, the soft drip from the eaves, all merging into a single, steady pulse that belonged not to the case, but to life itself. And for that rare morning, Sherlock Holmes allowed the world to keep its own time.